Number 1. Allison Mack. She was once the quintessential girl next door of primetime television, a rising star with a devoted following and a glittering future. But then, her story took a turn that absolutely no one saw coming. The actress who played a loyal best friend on screen became real-life infamous for her role in one of the most disturbing cult scandals in modern history. Born in Germany in 1982, she spent her early years traveling as an army brat with her father. Her family eventually settled in California, where she was already booking commercials and guest spots as a teenager. Her big break hit in 2001. She was cast as Chloe Sullivan on Smallville, a hit series about young Superman. Fans loved her portrayal of the witty, smart friend who always kept Clark Kent out of trouble. For 10 seasons, she was the heart of the show. Most people figured she would eventually become a Hollywood A-lister. Off-camera, her life seemed just as perfect. She stayed busy with charity work and spoke publicly about female empowerment. She was always warm and open with her fans. From the outside looking in, she was a professional, destined to stay in the industry for a long time. But a darker reality was brewing. Mack had started attending workshops for a self-help group called NX1VM around 2006. Marketed as leadership training, the organization promised to unlock a student's potential and teach self-discipline. It was run by Keith Raniere, a charismatic leader who portrayed himself as a genius and a philosopher. Over time, Mack fell deeper into the rabbit hole, climbing the ranks and earning Raniere's absolute trust. By the mid-2000s, she was no longer just a participant. She had entered his inner circle. What started as personal growth seminars slowly revealed a much more sinister core. NX1VM was actually a predatory cult that manipulated followers, stole their savings, and forced women into secret, submissive groups. Federal prosecutors later revealed that Allison Mack was directly involved in recruiting new women into these circles. In private, she lured them in by claiming they were joining an exclusive sisterhood dedicated to personal strength. But in truth, the group demanded total loyalty to Raniere and forced members into degrading, painful rituals. For years, the truth stayed hidden. Then, in 2017, former members and brave journalists finally started talking. Major news reports began exposing the horrific inner workings of NX1VM. Suddenly, Allison Mack's face was on the evening news not for acting, but for being a criminal suspect. People were stunned. How could the girl next door from Smallville be involved in something so dark and so twisted? The authorities moved in fast. In April 2018, federal agents arrested Mack at her home in Brooklyn. She faced heavy charges including racketeering, conspiracy, and even acts of forced labor. The indictment claimed she wasn't just a victim. She was a key recruiter who helped Raniere control his followers. Photos of Mack in handcuffs made global headlines. Her public image had officially been shattered. The legal battle dragged on for years with twists that kept the public hooked. Mack initially claimed innocence, but as Raniere's trial approached, she suddenly changed her tune. In April 2019, she pleaded guilty to racketeering charges, admitting she had manipulated women into joining the secret inner circle of the cult. Her tearful apology in court was all over the news, though many victims wondered if she was truly sorry or just scared. When her sentencing day finally arrived in June 2021, Mack was facing decades in federal prison. Prosecutors noted that she had cooperated against her leader, but they emphasized her high-level role. Victims testified about the lasting psychological damage they suffered and how they felt betrayed by the woman who recruited them. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 3 years in prison, along with a heavy fine and community service hours. Compared to the life sentence handed to Keith Raniere, Mack's prison time was short, but it marked the total collapse of her career and her name. No longer seen as a TV star, she was now known as the actress who helped lead a cult. Her case was picked apart in endless documentaries and investigative podcasts. Today, she has served her sentence and is free, but her place in the Hollywood spotlight is gone forever. She lives a quiet, isolated life now, forever tied to one of the most bizarre scandals in entertainment history. For those who loved her work, the hurt remains. For the critics, her case is a chilling reminder of how influence can be twisted into manipulation. This isn't just a story about one actress's sudden downfall. It's a story of how trust can be poisoned when power is disguised as help. And it leaves us wondering, how many other monsters are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the truth? Number 2. Patty Hearst. It began as one of the most shocking kidnappings in history, but ended with a famous heiress tied to armed robbery and years behind bars. Her story blurred the lines between victim and criminal, leaving the public obsessed and glued to every single headline. Patricia Campbell Hearst was born in 1954 into one of the most powerful and wealthy families in America. Her grandfather, William Ranf Hearst, built a media empire that made the Hearst name synonymous with power and influence. Patty grew up in absolute privilege, attending elite private schools before eventually enrolling at the University of California, Berkeley. Despite her massive fortune, she lived modestly in a small apartment with her fiancé, Stephen Weed, until everything shattered in February 1974. On the night of February 4th, 1974, armed members of the Symbian Liberation Army, a radical group, stormed her apartment, beat her fiancé, and forced her into a trunk. For weeks, the country waited as the group sent demands to the press. At first, Patty was seen as the terrified daughter of a wealthy dynasty, a pawn in a violent political game. But as time went on, the story took a twist that absolutely no one expected. 2 months later, security cameras captured her in a new role. On April 15, 1974, she was seen holding a rifle during a bank heist. The images shocked the nation. We have to ask, was she a willing participant, or had she been brainwashed by her captors? The debate raged as experts weighed in on Stockholm Syndrome, where a hostage begins to sympathize deeply with those who took them. For over a year, Patty lived as Tanya, her new alias, participating fully in the radical group's activities. The group carried out several robberies, shootouts, and bombings, becoming one of the most notorious domestic terrorist organizations of that era. Meanwhile, the Hearst family used their influence to plead for her return, while the contrast of her two identities dominated the news. The law eventually caught up. In September 1975, Patty was finally arrested in San Francisco. Federal agents found her armed, and she was taken into custody after more than a year on the run. Her trial became one of the most highly publicized and debated spectacles in American history. Prosecutors argued she had joined the group willingly, pointing to her active role in the bank robbery and other crimes. The defense countered that she was brainwashed and acting under extreme duress after months of isolation and brutal abuse. The trial gripped the country. Every detail was dissected, from her time in captivity to her life as a fugitive. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. In 1976, she was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 35 years. For many, it was a stunning outcome. Some saw her as a dangerous criminal who chose her path. Others believed she was a victim punished for surviving. Public opinion remained split, but the legal process moved forward. Later that year, her sentence was reduced to 7 years, though she still faced a long time behind bars. Patty served 22 months before President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence in 1979, citing the extraordinary circumstances. Decades later, in 2001, President Bill Clinton granted her a full pardon, effectively clearing her criminal record. Even with her freedom, Patty's story continued to fascinate the public. She later wrote memoirs, gave interviews, and even took on small acting roles in films directed by John Waters. But the question of her true involvement has never been settled. The case remains a famous example of the grey area of guilt. Was she just a frightened young woman broken by her captors? Or did she find a sense of purpose in rebelling against her wealthy upbringing? Courts delivered one answer, but public debate has kept the other alive. Today, she lives quietly, yet her name still sparks controversy. Her case changed the way America looked at kidnapping, coercion, and the limits of personal responsibility. It showed how even someone born into immense privilege could become entangled in a world of violence and crime. And it left behind a mystery that refuses to fade. Was she simply a victim of circumstance, or did she cross a line? Number 3, Jen Shah. She built her brand on luxury and drama, showcasing a glamorous life on reality television for all to see. But behind the designer labels and fiery attitude, she was hiding a massive criminal scheme. This wasn't a scripted TV twist. It was a federal indictment that landed her in prison. Jen Shah was born in 1973 in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was of Hawaiian and Tongan descent and grew up in a very close-knit family. After college, she married Sheriff Shah, a football coach at the University of Utah. Together, they raised 2 sons while Jen focused on their family. When the cameras started rolling, her world exploded into a level of fame she had never imagined. In 2020, Jen Shah stepped onto the stage of The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. She didn't just join the cast, she became the show's most talked about lightning rod. With her designer wardrobe and explosive temper, she was a perfect fit for the high-drama world of the Housewives franchise. People tuned in for the luxury, but they stayed for the fire she ignited with her fellow castmates. In front of the lens, she was sharp, unpredictable, and undeniably entertaining. Away from the Bravo cameras, Jen Shah was caught up in something far more sinister. Federal prosecutors alleged that Shah had spent nearly 10 years running a massive, high-stakes telemarketing scheme. Working with partners, she preyed on thousands of victims across the country, most of them vulnerable senior citizens. The fraud centered on selling fake services, promising regular people they could strike it rich with online businesses. But the services were a sham, leaving victims with empty bank accounts and a total loss of trust. For years, her scheme stayed hidden behind shell companies, but federal investigators were slowly tightening the net. By 2019, the FBI and Justice Department had linked Shah and her assistant Stuart Smith to the network. Wiretaps and bank records painted a grim picture of exactly how much money was being siphoned away. The ultimate turning point arrived in March 2021. Let's look at what happened. In a surreal collision of TV and true crime, feds arrested Shah in Utah while the cameras were rolling. The headlines exploded across the entertainment world instantly. A reality star famous for flaunting her wealth was suddenly accused of building that empire on the backs of the vulnerable. She faced heavy charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. At first, Shah went on the offensive, loudly proclaiming her innocence on camera and in the courtroom. While fans argued over whether she was being framed, prosecutors claimed the evidence against her was ironclad. The July 2022 trial was set to be one of the most explosive celebrity legal battles in years. But just days before she was set to face a jury, Jen Shah stunned the public. She stood in a New York courtroom and admitted her guilt to the federal judge. In her statement, she admitted she had knowingly misled victims by selling them services she knew were useless. That guilty plea marked the end of her defiance. After a year of claiming she was innocent, she finally took responsibility for her part in the scam. By January 2023, Shah was back for sentencing. Prosecutors pushed for a 10-year term, focusing on the sheer scale of the fraud and the thousands of lives she destroyed. Her defense team pleaded for mercy, citing her role as a mother and her past charitable efforts. Jen spoke directly to the judge, offering an apology for the pain and suffering her actions had triggered. The judge sentenced her to 78 months, 6.5 years plus $6.5 million in restitution. It was a heavy sentence, but still significantly less than the maximum she was facing. For a woman who lived for luxury, trading designer gowns for a prison uniform was a brutal fall. Jen Shah surrendered in February 2023 to begin her term at a federal prison in Texas. From prison, she sent word through her team, thanking her followers and vowing to make things right. To the fans at home, her empty chair was a reminder that reality TV had turned into a real-world nightmare. Her case fascinated the public and us, because it mixed the glitz of television with federal crime. To her loyal followers, she was a larger-than-life figure, full of charisma and fire. But to the people she scammed, she was simply the face of betrayal and stolen life savings. Today, Shah remains behind bars with a 2028 release date, leaving behind a legacy as one of reality TV's most infamous villains. It is proof that sometimes the drama off-camera is far more intense than anything a producer could script. The rise and fall of Jen Shah will be remembered as more than just a career ending. It serves as a dark cautionary tale about the high cost of greed disguised as glamour. For the people who once believed in the glittering illusion of wealth she sold, the reality was far more devastating than any shocking plot twist a producer could ever write. Number 4, Amy Lone. She was young, talented, and seemed to be living the ultimate Hollywood dream. Amy Lone became a star in the 1990s, appearing in major films and television series. But decades after her peak, her name would hit the headlines for a tragic and very different reason. Today, you and I are looking at a career that started with promise, but ended in blood. Amy Locane was born in 1971. By her teenage years, casting directors were noticing her. She started in commercials before finally making the leap into movies. In 1990, she starred alongside Johnny Depp in the John Waters cult classic, Cry Baby. 2 years later, She joined Melrose Place. That soap opera became a massive cultural phenomenon in the early 90s. For a time, Locane seemed destined to be one of Hollywood's brightest rising stars. She kept working in smaller films and TV guest spots, but her career never quite reached those predicted heights. By the early 2000s, she walked away from the spotlight to focus on her family in New Jersey. Then, on June 27th, 2010, everything changed. That night, Amy Locane was behind the wheel of her SUV after drinking at several parties earlier that evening. Witnesses said she was speeding and driving recklessly. As she entered a residential area, she slammed into another car at high speed. Inside the other car was Fred Seaman, who survived, and his wife Helen, who tragically died from the impact. The crash destroyed the Seaman family and left the local community in total shock. Police were on the scene fast. It did not take long for investigators to realize alcohol played a major role. Locane was arrested right there and charged with vehicular homicide and second-degree assault by auto. This case caught everyone's eye immediately, not just because of the tragedy, but because of her past fame as a well-known actress. Headlines called her the Melrose Place star facing years in prison, but the legal road ahead would be long and messy. At her trial in 2012, prosecutors argued she drank heavily and showed a total disregard for the safety of others on the road. The defense countered that she never intended harm, focusing instead on her life raising young children. Ultimately, the jury found her guilty of second-degree vehicular homicide and assault by auto. In 2013, a judge sentenced Locane to 3 years in state prison. That sentence was ripped apart by critics. The Seaman family was outraged, calling the 3-year term far too light for a life lost. Prosecutors immediately appealed, arguing that the punishment simply did not fit the gravity of the crime. This kicked off a years-long legal battle. Higher courts kept reviewing the case and telling trial judges to take another look. You and I have to ask, should her status as a mother have reduced her punishment, or did justice for the Seaman family require a much harsher outcome? This legal tug-of-war kept her in the news, sparking national debates about whether celebrities get special treatment in court. In September 2020, 10 years after the crash, Locane was ordered to head back to prison. A judge resentenced her to 8 years. She would have to serve at least 6 before even smelling parole. It was a shocking move. She had already served time and lived under supervision for years by then. But the court stood firm. The first sentence was too light, and real accountability required more time behind bars. The Seaman family welcomed the ruling. To them, justice had finally been served. Helen's widower, Fred, felt a sense of relief. The system had finally acknowledged the gravity of what happened. Locane's family saw it differently. They called the resentencing unfair, leaving her children without a mother all over again. All these strange twists turned the case into one of the most followed legal sagas involving a former Hollywood star. Locane's return to prison highlighted the devastating consequences of driving while impaired. Her story became a cautionary tale, reminding us that one reckless decision can take a life, shatter a family, and erase a career built over many years. While many still remember her as the young actress from those hit shows, her name is now more closely tied to the courtroom than to Hollywood fame. Today, Amy Locane remains in a New Jersey prison, serving out her sentence. Since she needs to serve 6 years for parole, she will likely finish most of that 8-year sentence. Her case is still cited in debates about sentencing fairness and the legal system. It is a study in celebrity justice and personal responsibility. For her old fans, the contrast is just heartbreaking. From the red carpet and television stardom to a cold prison cell in her home state, her story is one of opportunity lost and consequences that simply cannot be undone. The Seaman family continues to honor Helen's memory every single day, while Locane faces the harsh reality that her life will never return to what it once was. For you and I, this downfall serves as a sobering reminder. Fame is no shield. When tragedy strikes, even the biggest stars have to face the music in the end. Number 5. Felicia Snoop Pearson. Most actors use their imagination, but she built her character from the wreckage of her own life. Millions knew her as Snoop on HBO's The Wire. She played a lethal, cold enforcer who became one of the most haunting faces on the small screen. Today, you and I are uncovering a story where the reality was just as grim as the fiction. A life defined by violence, prison, and a conviction she carried into the spotlight. Felicia Pearson entered the world in Baltimore, 1980. Her childhood was a storm from day one. Born premature and addicted to drugs, she was quickly shuffled into foster care. By her teens, she was navigating the hardest streets in Baltimore, where crime wasn't just a choice, it was the air everyone breathed. Without a home or mentors, Pearson was left to find her own way through the dark. That path led her somewhere dangerous. At only 14 years old, her life took a sharp, permanent turn. During a 1995 standoff with another teen girl, Pearson pulled a trigger and ended a life. The victim died, and Pearson was hauled away. Even though she was just a kid, the legal system showed her no mercy. Convicted of second-degree murder, she was sentenced to 2 back-to-back 8-year prison terms. Thanks to her age and a clean record inside, she spent 6.5 years behind bars before her release. Most teenagers would have given up, but for Pearson, those prison walls became the starting line for a radical change. She earned her high school diploma inside and began dissecting the choices that had landed her in a cell. She also forged a survivor's armor, a toughness that would later perfectly mirror the legendary character she would play. Released in 2000, she hit the streets of Baltimore determined to stay clean, but completely unsure of where she belonged. Then her massive break arrived by pure chance. In a local club, she bumped into Michael K. Williams, the man behind the iconic Omar Little on The Wire. We often wonder how stars are born. Williams saw her spark and introduced her to producers, who cast her as the ruthless soldier, Snoop. Her presence was chilling. Stone-faced and casual, she treated violence like it was just another part of the job. Critics hailed her performance as one of the most authentic in television history. But that raw realism sparked a heavy backlash. The family of her 1995 victim was horrified. They couldn't believe a convicted killer was being celebrated for playing one. For them, it looked like Hollywood was rewarding her for the blood on her hands. Pearson pushed back, claiming the role was her shot at redemption, a way to turn her pain into a legitimate career and future. The debate only triggered more media coverage, making her a standout star. However, her history was a shadow that never truly seemed to fade away. Even after the show ended in 2008, she couldn't stay out of the crosshairs. In 2011, a drug raid in Baltimore caught her in the net, leading to heroin conspiracy charges. It wasn't as severe as her teenage crime, but it dragged her name through the mud all over again. Pearson eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy. She received a suspended sentence and served a short amount of time before being released back into the world on probation. Despite the setbacks, Pearson kept fighting to reclaim the narrative of her own story. She bared it all in her memoir, Grace After Midnight, detailing her childhood, the killing, and her time in a cell. In public, she spoke often about the crushing weight of poverty, and how easily the youth in Baltimore get swallowed by a system that offers them almost no hope of escape. Her journey transformed into a saga of redemption, surviving the streets, and the desperate search for second chances. To this day, the woman known as Snoop remains a polarizing figure. She still acts and attends events, but her legacy is forever split between her real crimes and her fictional hits. Some see her as living proof that a person can rise from their lowest moment and build a new world. Others see a reminder that some wounds never heal, and that victims shouldn't have to watch their attackers find fame. Her story is truly unique on this list. A teenager convicted of a killing who served her time, then achieved stardom by portraying almost the exact same life she once lived. Looking at this together, you and I see the messy collision of art and reality, leaving us with one haunting question. Did Pearson ever truly escape her past, or did she just bring it into our living rooms for entertainment? Number 6. Shannon Guess Richardson. She was a minor actress hunting for a break, appearing in small roles on hits like The Walking Dead. But Shannon Guess Richardson would achieve infamy not through her time on screen, but for an act so reckless that it dominated national news headlines. In 2013, she went from a TV extra to a federal prisoner after a ricin plot that stunned the nation. Shannon was born in Texas in 1977. Raised in a working-class family, she pursued an acting dream, though she never landed more than tiny roles. She worked under her birth name Shannon Rogers and later used the name Shannon Guess after her marriage. For years, she struggled through auditions, barely getting by on background work and occasional bookings. Her most notable appearances were Blink and You Miss It parts in massive productions, an extra in The Walking Dead, and a minor role in The Vampire Diaries. To those around her, she was chasing Hollywood, but success remained distant. By 2013, her life was unraveling. She was caught in the middle of a toxic, crumbling marriage with her husband, Nathan Richardson. Trapped in disputes over money and kids, their relationship was strained beyond repair. Then, in June, Shannon took a desperate turn that shocked the country. She mailed several letters laced with ricin, a lethal poison, addressed to President Barack Obama, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and the head of a prominent gun control advocacy group. The letters contained explicit threats, warning the recipients of what was in store if they pushed for new gun legislation. They were meant to terrify, proving someone was ready to use violence to make a political point. The discovery of ricin, a deadly toxin derived from castor beans, immediately set off alarms at the highest levels. Secret Service agents, the FBI, and counterterrorism units launched a massive investigation to find the source. We have to wonder who would try to poison the president and the mayor of New York. At first, Richardson tried to frame her husband. She told agents Nathan was responsible, claiming she found evidence against him and was just playing the messenger. But her elaborate story did not hold up. Digital forensics revealed that the materials were bought on her computer, with a trail leading right back to her online activity. Investigators also discovered that she had personally ordered the castor beans herself. Her handwriting was a perfect match, and her attempt to pin the crime on Nathan completely collapsed. On June 7, 2013, Shannon Guess Richardson was arrested in Texas. The news stunned the community and the press. This was no hardened criminal. She was a mother of 6 who once stood in the background of popular shows. The fact that she had targeted 2 of the most visible political figures in the entire country, the president and the mayor, made this case truly extraordinary. Facing a mountain of overwhelming evidence, Richardson chose to plead guilty. In December 2013, she admitted in federal court to manufacturing and possessing a biological toxin as a weapon. It was a chilling admission. This was not just a mistake, it was an act of bioterrorism. Prosecutors argued that even though the poison never reached the targets, the intent was dangerous enough to demand a very heavy sentence. In July 2014, the court finally handed down its verdict. Shannon Guess Richardson was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the massive resources spent investigating her crimes. At the sentencing, she broke down in tears, apologizing and claiming she only acted out of intense emotional turmoil. However, for the government, the sentence sent a clear message. Threats against national leaders using biological agents would result in the most severe consequences possible. The media remained fascinated by the case because it combined such strange and unlikely elements: a minor actress, a failing marriage, and a plot involving one of the world's deadliest poisons. It felt surreal that a woman who once walked through a zombie apocalypse on TV was now facing 2 decades in prison for targeting the president. Today, Shannon Guess Richardson remains incarcerated in a federal prison. Her release date is far off in the 2030s. Her career is dead, and her children are growing up without her. She is no longer remembered for her brief time on screen, but as a domestic criminal who dared to threaten some of the most protected offices in the nation. Her story is often cited as a grim reminder of how personal desperation and bad judgment can lead to catastrophe. For Shannon, her plan to frame her husband failed completely, leaving her name forever tied to one of Hollywood's most bizarre and shocking scandals. Today, you and I explore how a television career ended in an 18-year federal sentence. Her story proves that the most shocking crimes often involve the most unlikely people. Number 7, Betty Broderick. This was one of the most sensational cases of the 80s. It gripped the nation because it involved a suburban mother of 4, not a mobster. Betty Broderick was once the very definition of a wealthy California housewife, but a crumbling marriage and blinding rage led to a double homicide that put her away for life. She was born Elizabeth Ann Biscaglia in 1947 in Brooklyn, New York. Growing up as one of 6 in a strict Catholic home, her life's expectations were already set in stone. She was to marry, raise a family, and support her husband. Betty followed that path perfectly. In 1969, she wed Daniel Broderick, a sharp medical student she met while in college. Soon, the young couple moved to California. Daniel traded medicine for law, becoming a powerhouse malpractice attorney in San Diego. By the early 80s, the Brodericks were living a life of immense wealth and privilege. They owned a mansion in La Jolla, mixed with high society, and put their kids in private school. From the outside, they looked like the perfect American family. Betty focused on the kids while Daniel climbed the ladder, eventually earning millions as a legal star. But the mask was slipping. Daniel had hired a young new assistant named Linda Colcainer. By the mid-80s, Betty suspected an affair. Those fears were confirmed when Daniel walked out, shattering her world. The divorce was a brutal, public battle that left Betty feeling discarded and deeply humiliated. She claimed Daniel used his power to manipulate the courts and keep her from her money and children. Her friends saw a woman consumed by a rage she just could not let go of. That anger boiled over in shocking ways. Betty vandalized his house, left obscene messages, and even rammed her car through his front door. Judges scolded her, but Betty stood her ground, insisting she was the real victim of a powerful man. By 1989, Daniel and Linda were set to marry while Betty's world spiraled out of control. Now, let's step inside that morning together. On November 5th, Betty used her daughter's key and entered the house while they slept. She fired 5 rounds from a revolver. Neither Daniel nor Linda survived the morning. Betty ran, but turned herself in hours later. The crime sent shockwaves through San Diego society. How could a wealthy mother of 4 do something so terrible? The trial was a media circus, broadcast live across networks, and picked apart by every tabloid and newspaper in the country. The prosecution called it a cold-blooded execution fueled by jealousy. They argued it was a calculated, lethal hit. The defense painted a picture of a woman broken by years of abuse and a system that failed her. They told the jury she simply snapped under the pressure. Her first trial in 1990 ended in a hung jury and a mistrial. But during the second trial in 1991, the verdict was clear. Convicted on 2 counts of second-degree murder, Betty Broderick was eventually sentenced to 32 years to life. She would not be eligible for parole until serving 25 years. The sentence ended one of the most notorious domestic crime sagas in American history. For some, Betty was a victim of a husband and a legal system that held all the cards. To others, she was a calculating killer who chose violence over moving on. This divide turned her into a cultural figure, inspiring true crime books and hit television series. Today, Betty remains behind bars in California. Every request for parole has been denied. Now in her 70s, she still claims she was wronged, but the courts aren't listening anymore. Her children are still split, some want her out, while others believe she belongs in prison. Her story sticks with us because it happened in the quiet heart of wealthy suburbia. It proves that resentment can rot even the most perfect-looking lives from the inside. When she finally broke, it did not just destroy 2 people in that bedroom, it crushed an entire family caught in the tragic fallout. Decades later, you and I still have questions. Was she a tragic victim of emotional abuse and power dynamics? Or just a woman who refused to let go of her failed marriage? Regardless of the interpretation, the result remains unchanged. Betty Broderick, the former La Jolla socialite, will likely spend her remaining years behind prison walls. Number 8. Amanda Hayes. She once dreamed of making it in Hollywood, landing small roles in television. However, Amanda Perry Hayes became infamous for a crime that was as horrifying as it was tragic. In 2011, she and her husband, songwriter Grant Hayes, murdered his former girlfriend. The details that followed would haunt even the most experienced investigators. Born in 1974, Amanda grew up driven by her creative passions and artistic side. By her 30s, she had started chasing her acting dreams, appearing in minor roles on shows like The Sopranos, and even the film The Stepford Wives. These were just small background parts, but they kept her close to the entertainment industry she so desperately admired. By the late 2000s, she had moved to North Carolina. There, she married Grant Hayes, a local musician building a reputation as a songwriter. To neighbors and friends, Amanda and Grant seemed like a talented couple with a growing creative family. Yet inside their home, the atmosphere was thick, with jealousy, control, and constant simmering conflict. Grant had a history with a woman named Laura Ackerson. Together, the 2 of them shared 2 young children. By 2011, that relationship had dissolved into a nasty, bitter custody battle that was playing out in the courts. Now married to Grant, Amanda deeply resented Laura, seeing the young mother as a permanent hurdle in their lives. That resentment soon curdled into pure hatred. In July of that year, the couple hatched a plan to permanently remove Laura from their lives. On July 13th, 2011, Laura Ackerson arrived at the couple's Raleigh apartment, expecting to see her children. She would never be seen alive again. Prosecutors argued that once she was inside, Laura was killed and her body was systematically dismembered. Amanda stood by her husband, taking part in the gruesome attempt to erase the evidence of their crime. They drove the remains across state lines, traveling all the way to her sister's house in Texas. Once there, they tried to dispose of the evidence in a nearby creek, allegedly hoping that local alligators would finish the job and consume what was left. For weeks, the world looked for Laura as a missing person case. Her loved ones begged for information, knowing she would never just walk away from her 2 small children. Suspicion grew as investigators traced her final steps, and every trail led right back to the Hayes household. The evidence began to pile up. Phone records and witness stories highlighted the dark cracks in the couple's shifting accounts. The grim reality surfaced when remains were found in that Texas creek, linking the couple directly to the crime. The discovery horrified the entire public, and the case quickly exploded across the national news cycle. This was more than just the brutal murder of a young mother. It was a betrayal committed by a couple who had carefully played the role of respectable parents. Amanda's acting background added another layer of lurid detail for the tabloids, ensuring this tragic case received widespread national coverage. In 2014, the trial began, with both facing charges of second-degree murder and related crimes. The prosecution painted a truly chilling picture. Amanda and Grant had plotted, lured Laura into a trap, and then went to extreme lengths to hide the truth. The defense argued that she was a victim of her husband's manipulation, that she was just another pawn caught up in his control. But her active role in transporting and dumping the body was something the jury simply could not ignore. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 13 to 16 years, but her legal troubles were far from over. Texas prosecutors soon followed with their own charges for the tampering and concealment of the remains. In 2016, she was back in court, listening as the gruesome details of that Texas creek were read aloud. That jury found her guilty as well, and Amanda was handed an additional 20-year sentence to run consecutively after her North Carolina term. These back-to-back sentences ensured she would remain behind bars for decades. For Laura's grieving family, the verdict provided some justice, though it could never bring back the mother who was taken too soon. The case stands as a chilling reminder of how domestic disputes and custody battles, when fueled by pure hatred, can turn into total tragedy. Today, Amanda Perry Hayes remains behind bars. She is serving her time with virtually no realistic hope for an early release. Her life once flickered in small Hollywood roles, but today it is forever linked to a chilling crime in North Carolina history. This case involving Amanda Hayes reveals how deep jealousy can go, and how a desire to erase a rival destroys everyone involved. From the glow of television sets to the cold bars of a prison cell, her descent shows how fast life can turn dark. Number 9. Victoria Vetri. She was once a shining Hollywood star, a model and actress whose face was on every magazine, promising a life of pure glamour. Victoria Vetri, using the stage name Angela Dorian, she graced the screen in classics like Rosemary's Baby during the 60s. However, her life later took a terrifying turn. In 2010, she was arrested for shooting her husband, and by 2011, she was facing nearly a decade behind bars. Born in 1944 to Italian immigrants, Victoria Vetri grew up right in the heart of Los Angeles, surrounded by the Hollywood dream. She was always drawn to performing. By her early 20s, she was a professional model, quickly gaining fame for her truly striking and classic look. In 1967, she was named Playboy's Playmate of the Year. That title pushed her into the spotlight and opened every door in town. Hollywood was calling. She landed several roles, including a memorable part as Terry in the legendary horror film Rosemary's Baby. She also starred in the 1970 cult hit When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth, cementing her status as a legitimate double threat. But just like many starlets from that era, her career reached its peak and then faded away almost overnight. By the mid-70s, the big roles stopped coming, and the spotlight on Vetri's career began to dim for good. Away from the cameras, things got messy. She went through several marriages while battling personal demons and money troubles. By the early 2000s, she was living quietly in Los Angeles, almost entirely forgotten by the public eye. But behind closed doors, things were boiling over in her marriage to her fourth husband, Bruce. Their home was a battlefield of constant conflict. Neighbors later remembered the shouting matches echoing through the apartment walls. Everything changed on September 30th, 2010, when police responded to a report of a violent domestic dispute at her home. Officers arrived to find her husband shot directly in the chest. He survived the shooting and told police his wife pulled the trigger. The news sent shockwaves through the Hollywood community. A former Playmate of the Year, once a peer to cinema legends, was now being hauled away for attempted murder. Police arrested Vetri on the spot, charging her with attempted murder and causing massive bodily harm. The media swarmed the story, fascinated by her old fame and this truly bizarre, tragic fall from grace. Tabloids ran her glamorous 60s photos right next to her mugshot, a haunting image of an aging woman facing a life sentence. During the hearings, prosecutors painted a grim picture of her actions. They argued the shooting was no accident, but the breaking point of a violent marriage. Her husband's testimony was chillingly direct. He fully believed his wife had tried to end his life. Her defense argued there was no intent to kill, claiming the gun discharged accidentally during their screaming match. They pointed to her age, describing a woman whose life was falling apart, but who wasn't a danger to anyone. This trial was a media circus, with the Los Angeles Times and local news crews following every single update. Finally, in 2011, she took a plea deal for attempted voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 9 years in state prison. The deal saved her from a possible life sentence, but it guaranteed she would spend her golden years in a cell. That sentence brought the final curtain down on Victoria Vetri's Hollywood story. Once famous for her beauty and potential, she was now just another inmate facing a long stretch of incarceration. The public was captivated by the contrast. A woman who once walked red carpets was now living in a prison cell. She served her time at the California Institution for Women, located in Chino. Other inmates saw her as quiet and kept to herself, a far cry from the glamorous starlet of her youth. She was finally released in 2018, after serving roughly 7 years of her 9-year sentence. Now, Victoria Vetri stays out of sight, far from the spotlight. She is remembered more for her crimes than the movies she once starred in. People often point to her story as one of Hollywood's most tragic falls from grace. It is a reminder that fame is fleeting, and personal demons can lead to devastating, permanent choices. Today, the name Victoria Vetri is linked not to cinema classics, but to a dark and violent legacy. Instead, a brutal crime stunned everyone who once saw her as a star. Her story is a chilling reminder of how Hollywood dreams turn into nightmares, leaving a legacy of both glitz and ruin. Number 10. Aisling Tucker Reid. Fact is often weirder than fiction, and in her case the two became almost impossible to tell apart. She was an Oregon actress and horror hopeful whose real-life crime perfectly mirrored the dark role she was cast to play. By the time her trial hit the front pages, the haunting overlap between her roles and her reality turned this into one of the most infamous courtroom dramas in years. Aisling Tucker Reid was born in 1989, growing up in Oregon with dreams of writing and acting. She studied journalism, took on freelance writing, and threw herself into creative projects. But deep family tensions were simmering. In 2016, a fight over property boiled over into a tragedy that changed everything. On July 26, 2016, Moore Reid was at her mother's rural home when a fight started with her uncle, Shane Moore, over an inheritance and rights to the family property. According to investigators, the argument turned explosive. During the chaos, she grabbed a handgun. As her uncle stepped through the doorway, she pulled the trigger. That single shot was fatal. Shane Moore died right there. Police arrived quickly and took Moore Reid into custody. She initially claimed it was all self-defense, claiming she feared her uncle. However, prosecutors charged her with manslaughter, arguing her actions went way beyond protecting herself. She was soon out on bail awaiting trial. But what happened next made her case truly infamous. While out on bail for her uncle's death, she auditioned and won a role in a horror movie called From the Dark. In that film, she played a woman who carries out a brutal murder. The irony was terrifying. A real-life homicide defendant was acting out the exact crime she was accused of committing. Production finished before her trial even started. Once the public caught wind of the connection, headlines absolutely exploded. News outlets dubbed it the horror movie murder case, highlighting the creepy parallels between her role and her reality. Reporters weren't just covering the trial, but also the bizarre fact that she was starring in a movie about the same violence she allegedly committed. By 2019, as the trial approached, prosecutors gathered witness statements, forensics, and testimony from her own relatives. They argued this wasn't self-defense, but a reckless act driven by pure anger and family tension. Her defense insisted she felt threatened in that moment. This back and forth set the stage for one of Oregon's most closely watched trials in years. In January 2020, Maureen Reed decided not to risk a jury's verdict. She pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. In court, she admitted killing her uncle, but kept insisting that she believed she was in real danger. The deal saved her from a much longer sentence, but it sealed her fate as a convicted felon. The judge sentenced her to 75 months in prison, just over 6 years. For Shane Moore's family, it was a measure of justice, though the loss remains. For Maureen Reed, it was the end of both her acting dreams and her freedom. But the story didn't just fade away. National media outlets covered the sentencing, always highlighting the eerie overlap between her horror film role and her actual crime. Clips from the Dark were replayed on the news, showing an actress playing a killer while facing trial for a real murder. The unsettling coincidence gripped the public, making this case one of the strangest overlaps between Hollywood and true crime. Today, Aisling Tucker Maureen Reed is serving out her time in Oregon. She'll be eligible for release in the mid-2020s, but even then, life won't be the same. Her career is over. Her reputation is ruined. Her name forever tied to this haunting story of fiction bleeding into reality. This case is a stark reminder of how fast a life can unravel, and how the line between art and reality can blur in ways no one could ever script. For many, it left an impression that was both tragic and deeply unsettling. From promising journalist to convicted killer behind bars, Aisling Tucker Maureen Reed's story ends this chapter on actresses whose crimes stunned the nation. It leaves you and I with one final question. When reality mimics a performance, can you and I truly separate the role from the person playing it?